As the video opens, the defendant is already on the defensive. She tells Judge Judy that the party had ended by 4 p.m., and she tried to call the plaintiff at that time to notify her, but the plaintiff didn't answer. The defendant claims she eventually unplugged the bouncy house at 9 p.m., feeling that it was no longer in use and had been sitting idle for some time. She tells the court that the delay in pickup was not her fault. She tried to contact the plaintiff earlier. However, Judge Judy is already starting to scrutinize her story. The judge's tone makes it clear. When someone rents property like a bouncy house, they are responsible for it until it's returned, not just until the party is over. The defendant seems unaware that her responsibilities extend beyond the celebration. According to the defendant, shortly after her attempt to call the plaintiff, a group of unknown men showed up claiming to be from the plaintiff's party rental company. They casually asked how the party had gone, received a polite summary, and then proceeded to roll up the bouncy house and load it into their vehicle. The defendant insists that she believed them. They were friendly, acted like professionals, and seemed to know what they were doing. But Judge Judy isn't buying this version of events. She points out the obvious. The men were not the same individuals who had delivered the bouncy house, and the plaintiff herself wasn't present. The defendant handed over expensive rental equipment to complete strangers without any verification. And that, the judge is quick to note, is where her real mistake lies. Judge Judy's line of questioning becomes more pointed as she peels back the layers of the defendant's story. She asks whether the people who picked up the bouncy house were the same as the ones who delivered it. No, says the defendant. Was the plaintiff present when the pickup happened? Again, no. Judge Judy's expression sharpens. She repeats back the facts. The defendant, with no confirmation, handed over a valuable item to a group of total strangers, assuming they were legitimate. Her tone drips with disbelief. This, Judge Judy says, is not how responsible adults behave. With someone else's property, the defendant's nonchalant attitude toward the handoff, treating it like just another errand at the end of a busy day, is beginning to cost her dearly in the courtroom. It doesn't take long for Judge Judy to draw her conclusion. You gave the bouncy house to somebody else, she says bluntly. The defendant stammers, insisting that the men claim to be from the rental service, but that's not enough. Judge Judy cuts her off with a firm declaration. You owe her for the bouncy house. The courtroom falls silent for a moment. The defendant protests. She points to the rental contract, insisting it doesn't explicitly state that she's financially responsible for loss or theft. But Judge Judy waves this off with seasoned authority. She doesn't need a clause in the contract to know that common sense applies. If you rent something, you are responsible for its safe return, period. The defendant's excuses are no match for the judge's no-nonsense logic. In one of her classic moments of clarity and humor, Judge Judy decides to explain the defendant's error using an analogy. Imagine, she says, that you drive to a restaurant. Outside, someone stands at the curb and says, "I'll take your car." You assume it's valet service, hand over your keys, and head inside. But when you come back, the car is gone. Do you think the finance company's going to say, "Oh well, somebody stole it. Not your fault"? She asks rhetorically. The courtroom lambs, but the point lands like a hammer. The defendant looks sheepish as the reality sinks in. She treated a stranger like an authorized agent and expected everything to go smoothly. Judge Judy emphasizes that she's not buying the naivete. You're supposed to use your noodle, she snaps. And in this case, the defendant simply didn't. Judge Judy isn't just poking holes in the defendant's logic. She's dissecting the timeline too. She points out an inconsistency in the defendant's version of events. Originally, the defendant said she told the plaintiff to pick up the bouncy house at 6 p.m., but then she didn't unplug it until 9 p.m., even more confusing. She claimed she called the plaintiff at 9 o'clock and told her to arrive at 10 o'clock. Judge Judy calls this out as suspicious. If the pickup time was agreed to be 6 o'clock, why was the bouncy house still running 3 hours later? The shifting times don't add up, and Judge Judy uses this inconsistency to suggest that the defendant may be bending the truth, or at the very least, was careless in her handling of the situation. Still trying to dodge responsibility, the defendant insists that when she initially rented the bouncy house, she requested an early pickup before 6 p.m. She's trying to argue that the plaintiff should have come sooner, and that the loss of the bouncy house isn't entirely her fault. But Judge Judy isn't moved by this explanation. She interrupts sharply. I don't care. The courtroom again feels the weight of the judge's no-nonsense style. She makes it clear that prior arrangements don't absolve someone from taking care of property that's still in their possession. Whether the plaintiff came at 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, or 10 p.m., the defendant was still responsible for keeping the bouncy house safe until its rightful owner arrived. That duty didn't go away because she got tired of waiting. With liability clearly established, the conversation shifts to cost. Judge Judy asks the plaintiff how much the bouncy house was worth. The plaintiff explains that she originally purchased it for $2,200, but told the defendant it was worth $1,400. Due to depreciation, it was 3 years old at the time. She felt this was a fair value for reimbursement. Judge Judy, however, wants documentation. The plaintiff provides a receipt that confirms the original purchase price of $2,200. This document becomes the linchpin in determining the final judgment. The judge examines the receipt and uses it to solidify the amount that should be paid back, brushing aside any attempt by the defendant to argue down the value. In a last-ditch effort, the defendant refers to the contract again. She claims that the rental agreement only mentions being responsible for tables and chairs, not jumpers or bouncy houses, but the plaintiff presents the paperwork that clearly lists tables, chairs, or jumpers under the section outlining customer responsibilities. Judge Judy reads this section aloud in court and confirms that the wording indeed includes jumpers. With that, any remaining defense the defendant hoped to rely on collapses. The written agreement supports the plaintiff's version of events, leaving no ambiguity about the defendant's duty to protect the equipment until it was properly returned. At this point, the verdict is all but guaranteed. Judge Judy makes her ruling swiftly and decisively. Based on the plaintiff's documentation and the defendant's own admission that she gave the bouncy house to people she didn't know, the judge awards the full $2,200 in damages. Judgment for the plaintiff, she says, bringing the courtroom to a close. The defendant is left stunned and quiet. Judge Judy has no further patience for argument or protest. The lesson is clear: when you rent someone else's property, it's your job to ensure it gets back to them in one piece, not to hand it off to a group of strangers based on a hunch. As the bailiff bird dismisses the parties, the message of the case lingers. Responsibility doesn't end when the fun does.